Greetings, Exalted Ones. My name is Dash, and this is my Star Wars The Last Jedi review, which is going to talk about specific characters, plot points, and locations, so fair warning, spoilers are ahead. Now, I went into this film, as many of you probably did, thinking, like The Force Awakens that mirrored A New Hope, that this is going to be an Empire reboot, which I was, one, okay with, because Empire is the best film, objectively. I'm not the only one who thinks that, but two, wanted to feel safe that this is going to be a Star Wars that I really embraced and liked. And the film itself just stood on its own two legs without mirroring Empire. I'm happy to say that it didn't need to do so. However, the start of the film actually surprised me. I wasn't a massive fan of how the pacing and characters were introduced, because it really pushed, Poe as the head of this resistance, and we saw a lot of ancillary characters come through. There were bombs and people, like a lot of shots that kind of were close up on characters that really weren't seen again. I was okay, this is going to be some really clutch TIE fighter ship-to-ship combat, but I didn't know where they were going to go with it. And then it moved into comedy, and if you've read the books, Hux was kind of militant. I mean, he was a little bit kind of behind the times. However, what he lacked in raw intelligence, he made up with, in being vicious, which is touched on in the film later by Snoke. I think he calls him a cur, which is another name for a dog. I was happy with that. But at the start, there was a lot of gags that didn't really land for me, and it scared me. I thought, uh-oh, here we go. This is like Thor Ragnarok. People had hinted that it was going to be funny, but these jokes aren't landing for me. However, I'm happy to say everything kind of turned after the first act. It went from these ancillary characters to diving into the core storyline of Kylo, who was the standout character, and Rey also on par with Kylo, and they had a great dynamic and a great story which carried through the rest of the film. And I think everything about the film itself, in terms of the pacing, there was issues, again, I found with humor, but it was all building. You felt it. By the end of the film, you went, at the start, you're like, this is, there's a lot of cutaways, I don't care about these people, these jokes aren't landing, and then suddenly it's rising, and then this big crescendo, you just couldn't get enough of it. Even the introduction of Luke as this crabby old hermit, I couldn't help but draw parallels with Yoda. Yeah, that's right. And, spoiler alert, Yoda does show up. And if you look at Yoda as a character dispassionately, obviously as a puppet, he has some of the most profound and impactful dialogue in all the saga, and he still does in this film. And it's a little bit cheeky that they use these Force ghosts to teach Luke still, but it just proves that writing is everything. And Luke, because I guess he had gone to Ahch-To to die and perish, and he'd given up the Force, there was something that smacked about him that he started slow, but there's this simmer that really resonated throughout the whole film, where by the end you went, aha, this is where it all was leading. One of the things that I loved about the plot as well was the fact that there was such parallels to KOTOR. I will put money on the fact that whoever wrote this had played at least KOTOR 1 with the Revan and Bastila, meld that happened with Kylo Ren and Rey. And also the fact that Luke cut himself off from the Force. I know KOTOR 2, the exile was cut off forcibly, but it smacked of KOTOR in a lot of ways. It was an old Republic vibe, and I think that they moved into new Force powers as well, whether it was the meld or being able to, manifest yourself, or even powers like being one with the Force. And the Force itself was really discussed in a whole new way, and it didn't go into the Bendu or just balance. It was looking at the Force objectively and saying, expanding upon what Yoda had once said about it binding everything together, and Luke basically saying, look, everything that you do is cyclical, and it's ego that draws us into the thought that we really matter, and that, the Force is like the tide. It ebbs and it flows, but it will always maintain its own balance. And that helped really explain Rey's backstory, which, again, they really kind of hammed up. For somebody who watches the films like The Force Awakens to The Last Jedi, I wonder if they're really going to care about Rey's parent lineage as much as somebody who's waited a couple of years. Because when you wait a couple of years, you're like, oh, scavengers? Oh, that makes sense. But the way that they actually did that was acceptable. I had money on, they would do some big reveal. However, the way that it was articulated by Kylo Ren, again, Kylo Ren and Rey were the standouts, and their dialogue and their energy really lifted up the whole film. If we're talking about, obviously Luke, Leia was another standout. She was amazing. She stole the show. Poe was good, but it was almost as you go down the cast list, the less you cared about characters. Benicio del Toro's, I don't want to stutter to try and emulate him because I'll do it wrong, and I don't want to offend people with a stutter genuinely, but that was a really bad, poor character choice, I felt. I really didn't attach to him. I didn't know where they were trying to go with it. I thought, it's kind of like a Lando-y, he's going to betray and come back. They always seem to do the heart of gold at the end, and I liked that he was a little bit different. His beats were different, but as we go down the list in side stories, he was coupled with Finn and Rose, which were the weakest stories, in my opinion. I wanted Finn to have more of a build-up. I think that his final showdown with Phasma was cool. If you read the books, Phasma, I wanted to see her face or her rage kind of in full force, her fighting prowess as well. It felt a little bit cut short, but at least he had that a little bit more of a payoff. It was very, very, very janky. All these interactions with Rose, their storyline, and it felt like every time we moved away from Luke Skywalker, Leia, or Rey and Kylo Ren, everything was being detracted from. And so when you see how Kylo and Rey are intertwined, and that Snoke is a master manipulator, that was his main key power. Whether, he displayed some extraordinary force powers, like clonking her in the head with a lightsaber hilt, but his power of manipulating people and being so sure of himself, and his overconfidence being his weakness in his own power, like the Emperor, and not sticking out to the third and final film and being thrown down a reactor, but his arrogance being on display and Kylo taking advantage of that was really something else that I really enjoyed, and I couldn't believe that it happened. When I saw Kylo and Rey fight the Praetorian Guards, the first thing that popped in my head is, we find out Kylo's backstory was amazing with Luke, and it makes him less of a villain. But then when Snoke mentions that, hey, look, he started the Knights of Ren out of some ex-Jedi, you go, okay, so Knights of Ren are 100% ex-Jedi that left with, well, not 100% actually, because they predated him supposedly. So Snoke probably whispered in the ear of a bunch of Jedi, and then they turned to Knights of Ren. Are they the Praetorian Guards, which then he battles? Because that would make sense with the different weaponry. It was smart of Disney too to put Praetorian Guards in who are plastic men so that they could kill them. Because I don't think that you could tear people apart or put a lightsaber through someone's grill if they had a face. I think that was a smart move. I thought that they looked really dumb as toys in the build-up. I was like, these guards look crap compared to the Imperial Guards that, Palpatine had. Really smart move if you want to tear them apart en masse, which they did beautifully. The lightsaber fighting and all of the choreography and force powers were phenomenal. Obviously the huge build up to Luke's unveil, Leia's, Kylo's. Every time there was a fight sequence or the use of the force, it really stood out. It was impactful and it was quick, and it sent a message more so than the dialogue. I felt the dialogue was much weaker. The jokes were the weakest thing than dialogue, but the force powers and the visuals were really good. Speaking on the visual effects though, I found there were a couple of things that pulled me out. If you look at how Snoke actually grabbed on Rey, his hand was, it looked a little bit, and Snoke kind of looked a little bit janky overall, but outside of that, and maybe when Poe slides, down into the trench, I felt that too, there was just a couple of key moments which Star Wars seems to be known for. It's like Industrial Light and Magic are amazing. However, compared to like Thor Ragnarok, which seemed more seamless, even though that's much more green screen, there were a couple of moments that were weird. I think the Porgs kind of looked a bit off. I've been giving Porgs a lot of crap, but seeing Chewie nearly eat one was enough to kind of sate my bloodlust, and I saw how they did intertwine with the story. It was pandering. Porgs are 100% pandering to children to sell toys, but they did it in a way where I said, okay, you give me enough. I love Chewie. I love the Falcon. I love the usage. You can do some side gags, but I guess that's one of my biggest critiques of the film is dialogue, but also the humor. and the pacing, and they all intertwine because Han Solo, when he was funny, it was because his reaction to a situation, runs into a room, there's a bunch of stormtroopers, he screams, he shoots, he runs back, or his dialogue was naturally funny, but he wasn't telling a joke. A lot of these shots were reaction shots. Luke's, dusting off his shoulder when being blasted from a bunch of walkers. That's fine, that makes sense. However, it's like humor was incidental in the old Star Wars, and the old Star Wars focused on a couple of core characters pushing towards the plot, fighting against something. It's an action adventure. You're like Indiana Jones, you're always moving towards the next thing. This film stopped dead in so many places, whether it was the start or every time it moved away from, say, Kylo and Rey's story and went back to Rose and Finn. I didn't really attach to any of the Canto Bight, the gambling planet. That kind of was like, what are we doing here? The whole, kind of thinly veiled narrative about, horses and how they're treated by jockeys. That makes sense, I guess, if you want to tell that story. And then the payoff at the end of the kid has the Force and that everything is cyclical. But it kind of was, I guess, translucent. I was like, oh, you can poke a hole in that. It's not too much fun. The adventure kind of stopped a lot and started and stopped and started. And so it was strange because the film is great and most of it is fantastic, but there are it's like you could strip the fat and cut out a lot of the side characters, all the ancillary characters. Like I said, if you go through the cast list, the top build are the best, and then it kind of goes down. This story follows it to the point where, once you get down to the extras, you kind of wonder why they stop dead and do reaction shots for them versus, oh, we're gonna, on Hoth, you don't ever see like an extra get in a ship, do like a wink or something, or they might say a line to one another, but there was a lot of reaction shots peppered throughout. And it was something that Justice League actually suffered from as well, and I find it strange. Like, maybe it's a new habit, maybe it's something that's big in the business right now, but to me, it just, it rang untrue and inauthentic, and because it stopped the pacing and with dialogue issues of, I didn't feel as Star Warsy as, the original trilogy is obviously the tippy top. And it's funny that the original actors said how, they dealt with bad dialogue. However, the dialogue seems so much more safe and less pithy. And, there were so many throwaway lines that Han Solo said in A New Hope, about Ord Mantell or the Kessel Run, or these references to their lives, like they lived in the galaxy a lot more and they were just talking about their lives and they were thrust into an adventure. Whereas this, it's like, we know you're going to say XYZ versus just living your life. The sequence with Luke kind of living was cool, but again, him drinking that blue milk and doing that face, like there was a lot of reaction shots that I didn't love, but then obviously when the Force happened, that build up and those reactions, they were the parts that I really attached to. I think overall, Luke's arc was ended nicely. I think that, I thought, Finn was in a lot of trouble on Crate, and Poe, like everybody had these moments of suspense that were believable. I do want to say, still rest in peace to Carrie Fisher, talking about how she was phenomenal. I really loved how she kind of came back, and I thought, when John Boyega said that Carrie's going to get the send-off she deserves, I thought that her character had to be, pass on in the film. There's no way in my mind it wouldn't happen. So when she didn't, I was baffled. I was like, how do you explain that in episode 9? Disney have already promised they're not going to use CGI. John Boyega was like, she's getting a send-off. Did they originally film her for, no, they didn't do it for space because she had so many beats that were very important. I even thought that she was going to switch places with Holdo at one point. And so it was kind of, I don't know, it was strange to me because you just had that expectation. I don't know if the cast has been given prime directives of Disney of misdirection and Rey to say, oh, you should know who her parents are. What are they, filthy scavengers? Well, you should have known that. Like, it's good to go in and be surprised. However, a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the script it seemed like it was based around real events. Like, that actually shaped the way the film was made, with the expectations of these are the answers that the people want versus just the stories that the characters had lived. But I think that's basically everything in The Last Jedi, except for Rey I'm really excited to see her arc in Kylo Ren's because they're on opposite sides, and obviously Snoke is I mean, he's cactus. That was a brutal shot of him on the ground. But I don't know where they're going to go, as Kylo seems to understand that he needs redemption in his arc, and Luke keeps pushing, the light and the dark, and two sides of the same coin. And Kylo's smart enough to know that it's time for it to end. I don't know how that is going to transpire when there's no big bad boss. There's no Palpatine, there's no Snoke, there's no person to kill at episode 9 at the tippy top. Rey clearly hasn't turned yet. Who knows what's in the works for 9? I don't know how you kind of pull this back and make something as suspenseful, but they did an incredible job with the characters and cast. And it was all around an amazing film and adventure that, honestly, like I said, I went in expecting Empire and I got something completely different. I'm very happy that they went down a new route and that it's not all poetry like George Lucas said. But the beauty of this video is just the start of the discussion. I want to talk to you about it so much. I want to hear your thoughts, your feedback, things that I missed. This is my first viewing, and then go back in and watch and look for things that you guys say. Yeah, so let me know in the comments below, because if you love Star Wars, I want to talk to you about it. It's as simple as that. If you want to stay up to date with the latest Star Wars videos on origins, games, and theories, don't forget to use those force powers of yours and hit subscribe. And hey, leave a comment below about what you want to see in future videos. It may just get covered. Thanks for watching, and may the force be with you. Always.